Welcome to Scott's Shelf Book Reviews. Today we'll be talking about Stephen Kotler's The Art of Impossible. So The Art of Impossible talks about flow state and about some triggers for flow. He talks about incorporating that into performance and into creativity. And that last area was interesting for me because it's not a direction that I've usually approached flow state or research around flow state. So if you're interested in any of Stephen Kotler's work, you'll love this book. He does a great job of outlining ways for getting into a flow state and the ways that that can help your performance. And then, very interestingly to me, the way that that can enhance creativity. So who would benefit from this? Anybody who's a higher performance operator. So if what you need to do has high stakes and your performance is putting things on the line, then you could benefit from doing that in a more effective manner and being able to push into the higher realms of what's possible skill-wise within your arena of performance or expertise. Second, creative output. So if you're a person who creates things, and I'm used to thinking of creativity in terms of people who write poems or songs or paint or sculpt. But if you create something and your job is to produce that thing in a way that either can make it more beautiful or more useful or more efficient, any of those aspects of creativity would benefit from the principles and tools that Kotler puts forth in The Art of Impossible. And last, anybody aiming to expand the boundaries of a field of knowledge or activity. So if you're pushing the limits, that's where he draws the title of this book. The Art of Impossible is basically making a process for pushing the boundaries, pushing the edge of the envelope farther out and demonstrating what's possible for human beings. So if you want to be cutting edge, you want to quickly get to the top of your field and then expand what's possible within that field, definitely read Stephen Kotler's The Art of Impossible. So my takeaways, one is that flow optimizes creative work. So like I said before, I'm used to thinking of creativity within this very limited artistic sphere. And yet Kotler talks about creative work in a much broader sense. And so anytime that you're finding novel solutions to a problem, that's a way that you can be creative within your field, whether it's accounting or bricklaying or art, music, dance, all that. And so that reframe was a huge takeaway for me, that looking at problem solving as a method of creativity and a method of creative work was huge. And then the second step to that is bringing in flow as a way to optimize that. So if you're needing to solve problems on a recurring basis, and those problems are a little bit different every time, then you're going to have to, well, let me step back from that. You would optimizing that problem-solving process through some creativity enhancement that comes with being in a flow state. So Kotler talks about flow triggers, which is fantastic. And we'll get to that in a little bit. And that's where you can set yourself up for this more creative problem-solving work, whether your work is art, music, dance, bricklaying, accounting, what have you. Second takeaway, books provide the best return on investment. So in this book is the best description I've heard for why we should read books as opposed to browse the internet, read magazine articles, all the other options for intake of information. Kotler outlines why books are the best return on investment, because you're not just getting, here's the table of contents, here's a process for doing whatever you're trying to do. You're getting the life of the author and all that they're learning in the field condensed in the most accessible way possible within that book. So he offers an example of a blog post. A blog post takes him a certain amount of time. And maybe if it's got a lot of moving parts and he researches it, maybe it takes him a week or two to really nail that blog post and condense the information down and make it entertaining and applicable and orderly in a way that that resonates with readers. A book, on the other hand, takes him between 3 and 5 years. And so he's got a lot more time for his mind to work over the processes that are involved in creating work and then condensing and finding connections between pieces of information and really deepening his understanding about a subject. So in that 3 to 5 years that it takes for him to deepen the understanding and clarify his thought and learn how to express those thoughts in a way that resonates with readers and is entertaining and engaging, like that gives him more time for finding new connections, honing the method of delivery. And so reading a book in 8 to 10 hours of accumulated time lets you borrow the work that it took the author 3 to 5 years to do. And so that reminds me of a line that Stephen King wrote, and I'm not going to get it exactly right, but writing a book is like the best aspects of telepathy and time travel in one. And so here's an example of that. Stephen Kotler makes a great case for why we should read books. Third takeaway, process for learning quickly and getting into cutting edge territory. So if you want to excel at your field and then you want to push the envelope, Kotler outlines what you do. And it's a 5-step process. 1, you pick the 5 books of stupid. I love this title for this section. So assume that you know nothing and bring that humility into your research and find all the things that you're lacking. So it takes that attitude of humility in order to play catch up, whether it's a field that you're already working in or whether it's something new that you want to expand into. And right along with that is being willing to be the idiot. So being willing to ask the seemingly dumb question in class gives you the opportunity to learn the answer, which ultimately is the most important thing. Next, you explore the gaps. So there's going to be a set of terminology and a set of basic assumptions and a big picture framework that goes along with any endeavor, any field of study, any skill, any process. And that framework is going to have some gaps in it. So that's where you can find the next cutting edge things, right? That's where you can, you ask all the questions that make you look stupid. You find the things that you need to learn more about. You learn more about them. You find gaps after that. So it's an iterative process. You find gaps that maybe no one's really wanted to address that. And that's where you dig in. Fourth, always ask the next question. So he goes into a wonderful account of not stopping with a satisfactory answer that maybe plugs that gap, but really dig in. And always being willing to ask the next question means that we get a much more rich and detailed exploration of whatever gap we're pushing into and trying to find answers around. And then the last step in the process is finding the narrative. So we make sense of things in stories. And so we need to tell a new story to outline a new framework. And so finding the narrative gives you a chance to integrate information and knowledge and exploration and creativity in a way that works for humans. So that's the process for the 5-step process for getting into the new field, learning it quickly, and at least seeing where those cutting edge areas are and maybe poking at them a little bit. Continuing with takeaways from a broader perspective, this idea of a challenge skills balance. So with flow state, Kotler gives a great description of the fact that you can't be totally bored and you can't feel overwhelmed. You need to have somewhat of a balance between enough difficulty that you have to focus and pay attention, not so much difficulty that you feel the situation is hopeless. And so that he brings across in the challenge skills balance. This has been really helpful for me not just in terms of mental activity, so finding where my skill gaps are and working at an appropriate level there, but as I coach in the physical realm, especially with more complicated gymnastics or weightlifting moves that people are uncomfortable with, like we've really got to break it down and make it simple enough to where they feel that they can fill that skill gap. So the challenge skills balance, broadly applicable. Love it. Next up, flow states can be triggered. So the idea of being in a flow state is that you are operating optimally. So some descriptions of flow state are that you feel like you're watching things happen, that things seem somehow effortless, that you're flowing through a difficult situation without the feeling of intense effort. And that Kotler outlines the reasons why we experience it that way. And then associated with that are the trade-offs, the expenses that it takes to get to that. And so you can't live in flow state 24 hours a day because it takes too much energy. And so he talks about triggering flow state so that you can maximize the use of your time and the use of your energy. So this was a fascinating aspect of like basically getting some things out of the way. So making sure that you're sleeping enough, making sure that your nutrition, your activity, your movement is dialed in to the point where none of those physical things is going to be an obstacle for you being in flow state. And then he goes through similar mental and emotional lists for ways that you can set yourself up to enter that flow state most predictably. So the idea of flow triggers was fascinating to me. And I really look forward to implementing that in my own life as I move into more creative work. Next is this idea of hacking creativity. So again, this took some mental flexibility for me, letting go of the little box that I had put creativity into in terms of artistic endeavor and broadening it to generalized problem solving. So there again, we do our best creative work, whether it's artistic or whether it's problem solving, a more broad set of problems than artistic endeavors. We do better work the closer we are to flow state. And so we can hack creativity with those same flow triggers and setting ourselves up to be in a situation where we can take more advantage of the creativity of which we're possible. Last takeaway is this idea of a truth filter. So when learning anything, Kotler proposes that there's two mental meta skills or precursors. One is a growth mindset, and one is this idea of a truth filter. And so I'll do a review on Carol Dweck's wonderful book, Mindset. And in that, she talks about the differences between fixed and growth mindsets. And that aligns very well with what Kotler describes here in terms of growth mindset. The second aspect is a truth filter. So you need to believe with a growth mindset that you've got the possibility to learn in that direction. You can change and grow in that way. Second, the idea of a truth filter is the idea that you need a feedback loop, right? You need to know when you've gone off the rails as you're increasing your skill. So you need to incorporate some type of external checking mechanism with a short enough time frame that you can try your thing, get feedback, try your thing again, get feedback, make an adjustment, try your thing again, get feedback. And so he offers a journalistic example of a truth filter, but I think it's a great plug for anybody who's interested in team work. So, bringing in a buddy and asking them to, be a second set of eyes, truth checking on something, bringing in a coach and saying, here's an area where I'm trying to learn and grow. Can you make sure I'm staying on target? And, there's many ways that we can add a truth filter, but I think it's critical in the way that Kotler points out in this book, that we get accurate and helpful feedback in order to continue learning and growing. And that's really vital to this whole process of doing what was previously thought to be impossible, expanding the capacity of our performance in a given endeavor, or ultimately pushing the boundaries of what people believe to be possible within that endeavor. Connections. So I already talked about Carol Dweck's book, Mindset, and dealing with growth mindset versus fixed mindset. So that's a wonderful connection. Also, Gladwell's Outliers. So Gladwell talks about experts in their field. So people who have pushed the edges of the envelope and done things that were far and away better or different than what had been previously done. So there's a lot of overlap here with Gladwell looks at some of the precursors that went into that. Kotler's looking at it from a very individual internal perspective, like here's the flow triggers. And so it was interesting having read Outliers before, matching those conditions and support mechanisms that Gladwell highlights as, hey, we can't reach peak performance by ourselves. It takes all these other external teams and supporters and environments and mechanisms to push someone to that pinnacle of performance. Kotler is looking at it from more of an internal perspective, like here's how to make sure you've got something like that in place. Jordan Peterson talks about the balance between order and chaos and managing that on a micro level in individual situations as you learn and grow. And that comes up in all three of his books and many of his lectures. It layers in nicely with The Art of Impossible, going back to that idea of the challenge skills balance. So finding the trajectory for optimal growth means being on that area where you're uncomfortable. And Peterson describes that situation as having one foot grounded in order and stability and things that you're familiar with, and then reaching the other foot into the unknown and chaos and things you haven't learned yet and don't know how to deal with. And so walking that line between order and chaos is a theme that comes up in Art of Impossible that you may also recognize from Peterson's work. And lastly, I want to mention Josh Waitzkin's Art of Learning. There's a ton of overlap. There's slightly different terminology. So in The Art of Impossible, Stephen Kotler talks about flow state. In The Art of Learning, Waitzkin talks about being in the zone, but they're describing the same phenomena. They're describing maximal or optimal performance. And they both outline ways to set up internal states that make it more likely that you're going to achieve that flow or zone state or performance. So wonderful overlap there with Waitzkin. And I guess the contrast is Waitzkin brings in a different flavor from his martial arts background and his chess background versus Kotler's journalism and extreme sports, but they still both have mental and physical aspects to the ways that they tell that story about getting into a flow or zone performance state. So if you enjoyed this discussion, if you want to participate in deeper discussions about this book, The Art of Impossible, or other books that I've reviewed, head on over to Scott's Shelf. It's on Mighty Networks, and you can find more resources and links there. Also, we've got the possibility of live book clubs via Zoom. If you're interested in that, definitely leave a comment over on the Mighty Network at Scott's Shelf. Look forward to seeing you again. Take care.